program will introduce you to the router and describe how to safely and efficiently use this portable power tool. We'll start by briefly covering what a router can do and who uses one. Next, we'll go thoroughly over all the parts and controls of a router and the cutter bits which actually do the work of cutting. Safety is a very important consideration, and in the next portion of this program, we will cover all the rules for operating a router in a safe manner. Finally, we'll demonstrate proper operating procedures for using a router, including some helpful tips for avoiding common problems. The portable router is a power tool used for many light-duty shaping and cutting jobs. Routers are used to cut irregular shapes in dados, grooves, slots, mortises, and to make many kinds of joints. Routers are most commonly used for shaping edges in cabinetry and to perform simple procedures like cutting gaines into doors for hinges. Routers can be used to cut and shape wood, plastic, laminates, and various metals. Routers are fairly common tools used by carpenters, cabinet makers, homeowners, and tradesmen. Although they're not as powerful as their cousin, the stationary shaper, routers are a very versatile tool that can help to give projects a custom look. For example, it's possible to make custom molding and raised panel doors at the job site. To make a router useful, though, you must have a good selection of cutter bits which are properly maintained. It's also necessary to have templates, guides, jigs, or even a portable router table to control the router and use it to its full potential. The router is potentially a very dangerous tool, and great care must be taken whenever you're using one. Routers spin at very high speeds, which causes them to move like a powerful gyroscope. Because the cutter bit must be exposed during most operations, no guard can be installed to protect the operator. For these reasons, a router must be treated with great respect. Now let's take a closer look at the parts and controls of a router. The main parts of a router are housed in the body. The electric motor is the largest component and receives power from the power cord. The power switch is usually built into the body and locks the router in the on position for continuous operation. This allows the operator to use both hands to control the tool. Because routers turn at very high speeds, from 15,000 to 30,000 RPM, proper control is extremely important. Most routers have two fairly large knobs or handles for firmly grasping the tool on either side of the body. Sometimes an additional handle is mounted to the body with a trigger switch to put the power switch at a more convenient location. Routers make use of a split sleeve chuck called a collet chuck for grasping cutter bits which do the actual cutting. The cutter bit is secured in the collet by a lock nut which is tightened with a wrench. Because some collets are removable, a pair of wrenches are usually used to hold the cutter and the motor shaft at the same time. On some routers, there is a motor shaft locking device, so that only one wrench is required to tighten the locking nut. The router base rests on the surface of the material to be cut. The depth of the cut is controlled by raising and lowering the base of the router. The depth of the cut is indicated at the depth adjustment dial and is locked in position with the safety lock lever. The depth adjustment dial is not always precisely accurate. For making precise depth adjustments, it's important to make a test cut first and measure before cutting valuable stock. Router bits come in hundreds of shapes and sizes and with several different designs. In order for the router to perform its work properly, the right cutter must be used. Flutes are the separate cutting surfaces of the bit. In general, the more flutes, the smoother the cut. Router bits are made with straight flutes or twist flutes. They're made of high-speed steel or with tungsten carbide tips and with solid pilots or ball-bearing pilots. Some router bits have a combination of interchangeable parts. The spindle or arbor receives different cutter blades and pilots or ball-bearing guides according to the job at hand. It can all seem pretty confusing when trying to match the bit to the specific cutting job. For this reason, many manufacturers provide charts and tables to make the information more manageable. Here are some of the more common router bits. Straight bits are used for trimming edges flush, and for boring holes, forming slots and grooves, for mortising, and for cutting out shapes in thin stock. When fitted with a pilot or guide, straight cutter bits can be used with a template or guide to cut predetermined shapes. For example, this is the type of bit that is usually used in a plunge router to make precision dovetails. Edge-forming bits are used to form various smooth-shaped edges. Most edge-forming bits have pilots, so that the bit is self-guiding along the edge of the wood to be shaped. Common shapes for edge-forming bits are corner round, beading, chamfer, cove, and ogee. Special cutters can be used for cutting rivets, for cutting door lips, raised panels, and for cutting slots. Most routers have a round base. More deluxe routers have replaceable base plates so that surfaces of materials can be protected from damage caused by a worn base faceplate. The most important features to inspect when comparing different portable routers are power, the size of the collet chuck, and speed of rotation. Another feature which may be important is the base design. The power of the router is determined by the amperage of the motor. Most routers range from 5 to 15 amps or 1/2 to 3 horsepower. In general, a more powerful motor will cut faster and deeper, and it will last longer. The most common collet chuck sizes are 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, and 1/2 inch. These sizes must be matched to the size of the cutter bit shank which is to be used. Powerful routers are normally fitted with larger diameter collets to allow for heavy-duty cutting operations. But many of these routers will also accept the smaller collets as well. Speeds for routers range from 15,000 to 30,000 RPM. The most common speed for general-purpose routers is around 23,000 RPM. Laminate trimmers generally run at higher speeds. There are 3 general safety rules that you should always follow when using any power tools. First, all good safety practices are based on developing a knowledge of the proper procedures for operating the power tool. This knowledge includes both the correct methods for using the tool and the potential safety hazards which you might encounter. The second general safety rule is to develop the proper skills for using the power tool. Take time to learn and practice the skills. This means starting with simple procedures before attempting to use the tool in more complicated operations. The third general safety rule is to maintain the proper attitude. Careful and safe power tool operation requires time and effort on your part. Work carefully and maintain your attention at all times. You should be rested and sober when you work. Don't hurry and avoid distractions. Maintain a work area which is neat and clean. Start with level and sturdy workbenches and use properly grounded outlets and extension cords. Good lighting is very important, and so is adequate clearance around the tool and work area. Wear proper attire. Always wear proper clothing while operating power tools. Keep shirts buttoned, sleeves rolled up, and never wear loose, baggy, or frayed clothing. Remove dangling jewelry, secure long hair, or anything that might get caught on materials or in the tool. A lab jacket or apron can be worn to protect your clothing. Disconnect the power during setup. Always disconnect the power before changing router bits or making adjustments to the router. Use the proper router bit. Be sure to select the proper router bit for each specific operation. Don't try to make a cutter do a job for which it's not expressly designed. Use only router bits which are sharp and clean. A dull bit causes the router to work harder and may cause binding and burning of the stock. As the cutting edges become gummed with pitch, they may lose their effectiveness. Keep them clean and sharp. Check for proper setup. Check to see that the router bit is centered and properly secured in the chuck. Adjust the base for the proper height and secure it in position. Make a test cut on scrap and check the setup before cutting stock. Support the work properly. You should clamp down all material before doing any router work. The router requires both hands for proper control. Never hold on to small objects with your hands for support, and never operate the router with one hand. Control the router properly. Place the base on the work or against the template or guide. Keep the bit clear of the wood before turning it on. Keep a firm grasp of the router as you turn it on. Startup torque could wrench the router right out of your hand. Turn the router on and allow it to come up to full speed before making contact with the stock. Hold the router handles firmly with both hands and be careful to maintain proper alignment with the material. Ease the cutter into the stock slowly and steadily, and then guide the router along in the proper direction and at the proper speed. Try to move from left to right or in a counterclockwise direction when going around a piece of material. Move in the direction of the grain of the wood whenever possible. Keep proper footing at all times and never operate the router when you're off balance. Always keep your body away from the rotating bit. Whenever the router is plugged in or running, you must maintain a generous safety margin between the rotating cutter bit and your hands. Never reach under the router. Never point the cutter bit toward your body. Keep the working area clear, as debris and splinters can be thrown a fair distance. Never force the router. Let the router do the work for you and watch for overloading or binding. Now, if you must stop the router, back the cutter bit away from the wood before starting up again. This will help to prevent startup binding. Try not to stay in one place too long. This can cause burning of the wood or uneven cutting. Never leave the router while it's running. When you've completed the operation, turn off the router and hold it steady. Do not lift the router until it comes to a complete stop. Take care of your tools. Always remove the bit after you've finished the operation and put it in proper storage. Router bits are easily chipped and damaged. Clean off all dust and shavings before storing the router in a safe place. Here are a few demonstrations of how to properly operate a router safely and efficiently. For this example, we'll trim away excess laminate from a countertop. The router bit we've selected has a ball-bearing pilot that will roll along the counter edge for a guide. No layout will be required. But the surface the pilot rolls along must be smooth and clean in order to get a smoothly trimmed edge. Double-check to see that the power cord is unplugged before mounting a bit in the router. Insert the cutter bit until it contacts the bottom of the collet chuck. Tighten the lock nut on the chuck by hand while keeping the bit centered, and then finish tightening with the wrench. Set the proper depth of cut with the depth adjustment dial and secure it with a safety lock. You may have to make a test cut to verify the depth is properly set up. Wear eye protection whenever operating a router. You may also need to use a respirator mask and hearing protection. Grasp the router securely and position the base down on the countertop, but with the cutter bit away from the edge to be trimmed. Position yourself so that the router will be pushed into the rotation of the bit from left to right. Turn the router on and wait for it to reach full speed. With firm and even pressure, guide the router into the material. Remember to pay careful attention to what you're doing. Keep your hands completely clear of the bit as it rotates. Try to keep the router moving and don't apply too much pressure against the counter. It might leave burn marks that will be visible after the job is done. When the operation is finished, allow the router to come to a complete stop before lifting it up and setting it down. Now double-check your work. Unplug the power cord, remove the bit, and put it back in proper storage. Clean the dust and shavings from the router before you store it in a safe place. For our next demonstration, we will use an OG Edge Shaper bit with pilot to shape the side of some hardwood stock. The router we'll use is a heavy-duty general-purpose model. Of course, wear proper protection whenever operating power tools. Next, plug in the power cord and place the router on top of the surface, but with a cutting bit away from the wood. Turn on the router and let the motor come up to full speed. Firmly grasp both handles while guiding the router into the wood. Proceed slowly until the edge of the base touches the guide. Propel the router along the guide at the proper speed. The sound and feel of the router will tell you if you're advancing at the proper rate. As you near the end of the board, be prepared so that you will not lose control. Turn off the router and wait for it to come to a complete stop. Here are a few brief examples of some more procedures you can perform with a router. One common use for the router is for cutting dado slots for shelving. A clamp guide helps to make the dados straight and square. Routers can be used with dovetail templates. Now, this setup makes precision joinery possible even for the less experienced woodworker. A portable router table makes a router almost as powerful and versatile as a stationary shaper. Now, remember to keep a generous margin of safety and follow all the safety rules for a handheld router. Routers can be made to perform a variety of carving operations. This pattern tool allows the router to be used for sign carving. The possibilities are nearly endless. One general tip when using the router is to try to move with the grain of the wood and against the rotation of the bit. When going around a frame, for example, route the end grain first from left to right. Then finish up by routing with the grain. This will minimize splintering problems. Before we end this program, let's take a moment to review the safety rules for operating the portable router. Remember that good safety procedures always start with a proper knowledge, skills, and attitude. In addition, you must follow these safety rules. Wear proper attire. Avoid anything that might get caught either in the rotating bit or on the material you're cutting. Disconnect the power during setup. Keep the unplugged cord in view to be sure it's safe to change bits or make adjustments. Use the proper router bit. Think about the operation and select the bit that's designed specifically for the job. Use only router bits which are sharp and clean. Take measures to protect your bits and store them properly when not in use. Check for proper setup. Always do a final check before turning on the router. Support the work properly. Proper support will help to prevent binding, damage to materials, and injury. Clamp all work down so you can keep both hands on the router. Protect yourself. Wear eye and hearing protection whenever you're using a router. Now, if dust is a problem, wear a respirator. Pay attention and stay alert. Don't talk to others or let yourself get distracted when you're operating power tools. Prevent electrical hazards. Use properly grounded cords in good condition. Control the router properly. Know the proper way to operate the router for each separate operation. Move the router against the direction of rotation of the cutter bit, usually left to right. Always keep your body away from the rotating bit. Never reach underneath the wood. Never point the cutter bit toward you when the router is plugged in. Never force the router. If the router begins to slow down or bind, there's a reason. Find out what's causing the problem before you proceed. Never leave the router while it's running. Let the router come to a complete stop before lifting it away from the wood. Take care of your tools. Always remove the cutter bit from the router when the job is complete, and store all tools properly. By taking the time to become fully familiar with how portable power tools operate, you can develop the necessary knowledge and skills to use the tools to their full potential. And with the right attitude, you can make their use safer at the same time.